Hollywood is full of untold stories, and James Garner has just uncovered one that's been hidden for decades. Ow! It all goes back to the filming of The Great Escape, the iconic 1963 war film that left a lasting mark on cinema history. Behind the scenes, though, tension simmered, especially between Garner and a rising star, Charles Bronson. For years, Garner stayed silent, not wanting to fan the flames. But now, he's opening up. What he reveals about Bronson is both unexpected and deeply personal. What caused their feud? Why did bitterness linger for so long? In what moment almost led to a physical fight? Keep reading to find out. Garner's story reads like a raw coming-of-age drama set during some of America's toughest times. Born in Norman, Oklahoma, during the Great Depression, his childhood was far from easy. His father, Weldon Bumnar, ran a hardware store and did his best to support the family, but tragedy struck early. When James was just 4, his mother, who was part Cherokee, passed away. Years later, Garner would reveal his painful belief that she died from a botched abortion. Hardship followed quickly. Weldon's hardware store burned down, forcing him to switch careers to laying carpets. Along with the new job came a worsening drinking problem, and the home became a place of fear. Weldon would come home drunk, demanding his boys sing for their supper, refuse, and they faced beatings. Things grew so unbearable that Weldon eventually separated the boys, sending each to live with different relatives. It seemed he couldn't manage fatherhood. Then Weldon remarried and called the boys back home. What should have been a fresh start wasn't. The new stepmother, Wilmonic named, read by Weldon, proved even more violent. She beat the boys with branches. They were forced to gather themselves. James bore the worst of it. Beyond physical abuse, Bed humiliated him by making him wear her dresses and makeup to mock him. By his early teens, James reached a breaking point. At 14, during one of Red's brutal attacks, something snapped. He fought back, pinning her down and starting to strangle her. His father had to pull him off. James later admitted that without Weldon's intervention, he might have killed her. After that terrifying episode, Weldon did what he often did. He left. This time he abandoned his children completely, forcing James to fend for himself. Despite everything, James refused to fall apart. He dropped out of high school and at 16, lying about his age, joined the Merchant Navy just as World War II was ending. But the sea didn't suit him. He suffered from terrible seasickness and soon left. Back on land, took on whatever jobs he could find. Gas station attendant, carpet layer, even underwear model. That modeling stint gave him a small taste of show business. By 1950, he was in Los Angeles again, living with his father for a second time, still searching for his place in the world. Then the Korean War broke out. Because he was still officially an Oklahoma resident, James became the first man from the state to be drafted. Sent overseas with the 5th Regimental Combat Team of the 24th Division, he spent 9 grueling months in combat. But his wartime experiences were like scenes from an action film, but painfully real. On just his second day in Korea, shrapnel tore through his hand and face. Later, in a tragic case of friendly fire, U.S. planes mistook his unit for the enemy and opened fire. James was hit in the rear and scrambled for cover. Trying to climb out of a foxhole, he fell off a cliff, injuring his shoulder and worsening his already damaged knees. Reflecting on it later, James felt the military saw him as just another body to fill the ranks. Even amid the chaos of combat, James Garner's unique quirks stood out. One night while on guard duty, he caught a faint scent of garlic drifting through the air, a smell that instantly made his stomach turn. Garner hated garlic even more than onions, able to detect it in the slightest trace, even from a pan that hadn't been properly cleaned. That night, his sensitive nose became an unexpected warning. Enemy troops from North Korea or China were nearby. Thanks to his keen senses, he alerted his unit, and they were prepared for the danger ahead. After the war, James returned to Los Angeles and fell back into odd jobs. At one point, he was laying carpets again, this time working alongside his father and also pumping gas at a local station. It was there that fate intervened. He met a man named Paul Gregory, who was starting a talent agency. Paul saw something in James, a certain look he believed was made for acting. James didn't think much of it then, but years later, spotting Paul's name on a talent agency door, he decided to stop in. That chance visit changed everything. Paul took a chance on James, landing him his first real acting role in a stage production of the Caine Mutiny court-martial. Fast forward to 1957, and James Garner was on fire. That year he starred alongside Marlon Brando in Sayonara and made a major splash on television as Brett Maverick, the smooth-talking, quick-witted gambler in the hit series Maverick. The show followed Brett and his brother Bart as they roamed the Wild West, chasing fortune, danger, and the occasional poker game. Garner played Brett, while Jack Kelly took on Bart, with the brothers swapping lead roles, episode by episode. From the start, it was clear James Garner was the standout star. His cool, laid-back style combined with sly humor quickly made him a fan favorite. He wasn't the typical gunslinger, clever, charming, and often winning with brains over brawn. 4. The first few seasons, everything went great. Garner was becoming a household name and solidifying his place in the booming Western genre. But then, in 1960, a major roadblock appeared. The Writers Guild of America went on strike, and Hollywood productions ground to a halt. Like many shows, Maverick stopped receiving new scripts. Here's where things got tough for Garner. He had signed a 5-2E contract with Warner Brothers, earning just $1,250 a week, not much given the show's popularity. The studio decided that since there were no scripts, they didn't have to pay him. That didn't sit well with Garner. Fed up with being treated like a pawn, he sued Warner Brothers for breach of contract and won. The court made it clear. The studio couldn't freeze his paycheck during a strike. Warner Brothers tried to smooth things over with a new deal. But Garner had made up his mind. He wanted freedom, the ability to choose his own roles, and forge his own path, so he walked away from Maverick. But that wasn't the end of the road for him or his fans. In 1963, The Great Escape hit theaters and exploded into one of the era's most iconic war films. It had everything: a daring prison break, a gripping storyline, and a cast packed with Hollywood heavyweights. Leading the charge was Steve McQueen, the undisputed king of cool who shot to superstardom with the film. Yet, while the on-screen action was intense, the real drama unfolded behind the camera, especially between Charles Bronson and James Garner. At the time, Bronson was still climbing the Hollywood ladder and wasn't yet the tough guy legend he'd become. Garner, meanwhile, was riding high off his TV success. You'd expect some camaraderie, but according to Garner, that wasn't the case. From day one, tensions ran high. Garner described Bronson as cold, standoffish, in his own words, a mean man. Their friction was so intense that Garner recounted stories of Bronson's difficult behavior for decades after filming wrapped, and Bronson passed away in the early 2000s. Garner used his autobiography to finally share those behind-the-scenes memories, painting Bronson not just as hard to work with, but downright hostile. Bronson wasn't Garner's only challenge on set. Even Steve McQueen, the film's breakout star, wasn't immune to Garner's criticism. He admitted McQueen's ego sometimes got out of control during filming. Still, Garner chalked that up to passion and let it slide. Bronson's grudge, however, lasted a lifetime. Looking closer at the cast dynamics helps explain why things got so messy. McQueen was the golden boy. Garner was a confident TV star making the leap to film. Bronson, meanwhile, was the underdog, still fighting to prove himself. Surrounded by big names, perhaps he felt the need to puff up his chest, and puff up he did, acting like a top-billed star when he very much wasn't. Garner suggested that Bronson's difficult attitude wasn't driven by dedication to the role, but rather a desire to dominate the set, and that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. One story Garner shared years later really captured the tension between them. After filming wrapped, Garner invited Bronson over for a friendly poker night. It was probably an olive branch, or maybe one last attempt at civility, but things quickly went downhill. Bronson tried to back out of a bet he'd already placed, not only with Garner but also with a young stagehand who couldn't afford to lose that kind of money. Garner stood his ground, defending the kid and insisting Bronson pay the $50 he owed. That's when things got heated. Bronson exploded in anger, and the two nearly came to blows. That night marked the last time Garner invited Bronson over. From then on, their feud was set in stone. The tension didn't fade after The Great Escape became a hit. Bronson vowed never to work with Garner again, and he wasn't bluffing. But fate had other plans. Years later, the two found themselves at dinner together, each accompanied by their wives, Lois Clark with Garner, Jill Ireland with Bronson. The women hit it off instantly, chatting like old friends. The men not so much. Garner and Bronson sat stiffly, barely speaking, each trying to avoid reigniting their off-screen feud. For James Garner, however, the most remarkable chapter was still to come. In 1974, the Rockford Files debuted on TV and quickly became a breakout hit. But this wasn't your typical detective show. It had a unique edge and unmistakable style. Garner stepped into the role of Jim Rockford, a private eye with a record, a rundown trailer by the beach, and a talent for landing in trouble most would avoid. And he did it all with charm, wit, and that now iconic gold Pontiac Firebird rumbling along beside him. What set the show apart was how different Rockford was from the typical action heroes of the time. He wasn't slick or flashy. He was scrappy, relatable, and always a bit down on his luck. Best of all, Garner insisted on performing all his own stunts. Whether barreling through high-speed car chases or throwing punches in parking lots, it was always Garner, no stunt doubles, just grit, a car, sheer determination. The show leaned more into clever plot twists and car chases than gunfights. But those stunts were no joke. Garner had been honing his driving skills since his early film days. By the time Rockford rolled around, he was a pro behind the wheel. As the seasons passed, however, the physical toll of doing all those stunts began to catch up with him. His knees, back, and body started to wear down. By the 6th season, his doctor delivered tough news. He needed to slow down. Garner realized that if he couldn't do the stunts himself, he couldn't really be Jim Rockford anymore. NBC knew it too. Without him front and center, there wasn't much point in continuing the show, especially with production costs rising. On top of the physical pain, Garner was embroiled in a legal battle with NBC over profit shares from reruns. He also underwent serious heart surgery. It was a rough period professionally and personally, but it showed just how much he had invested in making the Rockford Files a success. And speaking of success, the show wasn't cheap to produce. The Firebird got wrecked so often during filming. It had to be replaced multiple times each season, not to mention the frequent repair costs after nearly every episode. Add in rising budgets for guest stars and more ambitious scenes, and NBC was feeling the financial pinch. Still, the show had an undeniable charm that fans loved. One fan-favorite quirk was the answering machine gag at the start of every episode. Rockford never picked up his phone. Instead, viewers heard a different, often hilarious voicemail each time. Coming up with fresh jokes week after week became so challenging that the writers started taking suggestions from anyone working in the NBC building. Behind the scenes, the Rockford Files boasted some serious talent. David Chase, who would later create The Sopranos, was one of the show's writers. And the catchy theme music, that was by Mike Post, the same composer who would go on to craft the iconic Law and Order theme. Despite the off-camera drama and the physical toll on Garner, the show remained a major hit. For James Garner, it wasn't just a return to TV, it was a bold statement. After Maverick, Rockford proved he still had the charm, grit, and that unmistakable spark. But unlike his younger days, doing his own stunts began to wear on him. Over time, injuries piled up, and rising production costs only added to the pressure. Eventually, it wasn't the fans who ended the show. It was the mounting challenges behind the scenes that brought the Rockford Files to a close. Still, Garner wasn't ready to slow down. Even into the 2000s, he kept proving he had what it took. In 2000, he starred alongside Clint Eastwood, Donald Sutherland, Tommy Lee Jones, and Space Cowboys, a film about retired astronauts called back into action to fix a Cold War-era satellite. The movie mixed action, humor, and nostalgia, with 4 Hollywood legends showing they still had what it took to save the day. Behind the scenes, though things weren't as smooth as they looked, The spacesuits were stiff, heavy, and notoriously hard to move in. Tommy Lee Jones, the youngest at 53, complained openly about the discomfort. Donald Sutherland actually fell backward in his suit, cracking his knee. And Garner, then 72, took a spill himself, dislocating his shoulder during a scene. But here's the kicker. Despite the injuries, both Sutherland and Garner pushed through. In a moment straight out of a movie, Clint Eastwood stepped up to help. With a background of his own shoulder injuries from a 1970s film, Eastwood gave Garner on-the-spot first aid and popped his shoulder back into place. Ever the tough guy, Garner didn't call it quits. He finished filming that very day. Eastwood later admitted it took him much longer to recover before getting back to golf. But Garner brushed off the accident as simple clumsiness, never blaming his age. The only time the cast seemed to acknowledge their advancing years was during a scene where they had to bare their backsides. Sutherland joked that he desperately searched for something to cover himself but found nothing, laughing about how gravity had taken its toll over the years. Garner's insistence on doing his own stunts took a heavy toll. Chronic injuries to his knees and back led to multiple surgeries. He underwent knee operations during every break from acting for 5 years straight. Eventually, the injuries caught up with him, forcing him to give up stunt work altogether. And it wasn't just his knees and back that suffered. In 1988, James Garner underwent heart surgery to clear a blockage, and 2 decades later, in 2008, he faced another major health challenge, a mild stroke that required further surgery. Playing Jim Rockford for 6 intense seasons had taken a serious toll on his body, yet Garner pushed through it all with the same grit and determination that made him a star. When asked why he finally stepped away from the Rockford Files, Garner explained that one injury triggered a domino effect. Limping on one leg strained the other, which caused his back to go out. The medication he took upset his stomach, and eventually, even his mood began to suffer. It was the slow, inevitable breakdown that comes from pushing your body hard for decades without a break. On top of all that, he battled a persistent sinus problem for 4 years. A bone growth was blocking one of his sinuses, and no medication could relieve the discomfort. It became just another constant, unwelcome companion in his life, always there. It's always uncomfortable. Many believe that anxiety also played a role in his health struggles. During a particularly stressful period in the 1970s, Garner suffered from ulcers and even separated from his wife for a time. He later admitted that during those breaks, he spent time moving between Canada and a rented home in the valley. But he was quick to emphasize that the separations weren't due to problems in their relationship, they stemmed from the intense pressures of his career. Eventually, Garner and his wife reconciled and remained together until his passing. James Garner died in 2014 at the age of 86 from a heart attack. His wife followed 7 years later, in October 2021. Through it all, Garner never lost the unique blend of toughness, humor, and heart that endeared him to audiences for decades.